For a vast number of Americans, including myself, our grandparents or great-grandparents arrived in the United States as immigrants. This would have been back in the early 1900s, roughly between 1890 and 1930. Now, there were no airlines back then, so folks arrived in America by steamship from any number of European ports. These would be Poles, Russians, Greeks, Turks, Italians, or any other Eastern European ethnicity. For all passengers, there was, of course, that indescribable moment when they first viewed the Statue of Liberty from the deck of their steamship as they entered New York Harbor. Now, first and second class were left off in lower Manhattan with nothing more than a precursory check of their papers. However, immigrants in third class, or steerage as it was called, were ferried by barge with their few meager bags to Ellis Island, sitting in the shadow of Lady Liberty. There, with the ship's manifest number pinned to their clothes, they were queued up by the thousands to enter the intimidating immigration station with its four domed towers. After checking their belongings in the baggage room, our ancestors were marched up a long winding staircase up into the Great Hall with its impressive high-arched ceiling, where they were fed through a maze of tall metal railings for registry. Just imagine the cacophony of languages echoing off those walls, not to mention the smells. First, the men and women were separated for brief physical exams, lasting anywhere from 6 seconds if you looked robust and healthy, to 6 minutes if you didn't. In particular, Ellis Island doctors looked for rashes, fever, birth defects, limps, labored breathing, excessive coughing, lice, contagious eye disease, and even feeble-mindedness. Anyone with suspected health issues were marked with a letter on their clothing using a piece of chalk and sent to the Ellis Island Hospital, where their ultimate fate would be determined later. If they passed the physical, the next step was waiting in long lines again to be questioned by the registry inspectors, sitting on tall stools behind high desks that contained all the ship's manifests. Behind them stood dozens of translators, as few immigrants spoke a lick of English back then, my ancestors included. Any issue with an immigrant's data might put them in front of the Board of Special Inquiry, who would ultimately decide if they could stay in the United States or not. During their crossing, they were required to complete 29 questions and hand them in at Ellis Island. Their answers became part of the ship's manifest and were scrutinized by the immigration inspectors sitting in the Great Hall. Most of the questions were fairly basic. What is your name, your age, sex, and race? Your hair color and eye color, much like on our licenses for driving. Are you married or single? Where were you born? What country are you from? What was your address there? Notice there was never a question about religion. Then there were questions on your sustainability in the United States. Can you read or write? How much money did you bring? The equivalent of $50 was preferred. Not much today, but a bounty back then. What is your occupation or trade? Where do you intend to live and work in the United States? What is the name and address of any relatives already here? And lastly, there were more pointed questions, like, are you a polygamist, an anarchist? Do you have any identifying scars or birthmarks? Do you have any deformities or diseases? Have you ever been in prison or an asylum? The key questions the inspectors focused on were purposely scattered throughout the long list. Basically, do you know a trade? Do you have any money? And where will you work in the United States? In other words, would this person contribute to the economy or be a burden on society? Just imagine the fear coursing through our poor ancestors' veins as they stood anxiously before these intimidating inspectors. Due to the thousands of immigrants being processed every day, the interview could take as little as 2 minutes. Only if all was in order, physical and registry, would the nervous immigrant finally be released. And that was it. There are no complicated green cards or visas to deal with back then. There are a number of free websites like ellisisland.org that let you search through the ship's manifests for your ancestor's name. I highly recommend doing it. There's nothing quite like seeing your great-grandparents' names handwritten on an Ellis Island ledger the very moment they became Americans. The entire process would take up to 5 nerve-wracking hours of waiting. At any time, they might be denied entry and sent back across the ocean on the next available steamship. Leaving the Great Hall were the stairs of separation, where those free to go went down one side and those detained went down the other. Dormitories are on the island to house those detainees. That's why it was often referred to as the Island of Hope and the Island of Tears. Once cleared, the immigrants could grab a free meal in the dining hall, retrieve their baggage, exchange their foreign currency for dollars, and even buy train tickets to Point West. For those lucky enough to have relatives waiting for them, they could be found standing outside the building, rushing towards them with open arms and kisses. Just imagine leaving everything you knew behind, your entire life, sometimes your family, with the hopes of a better world, a better life in free America, the land of unlimited opportunity. A single carpet bag or leather satchel carried all your worldly possessions. Perhaps you were fleeing war, or tyranny, or poverty. Perhaps, like my teenage grandparents, you left your own parents behind in the old country. You survived a wave-tossed Atlantic crossing in the belly of a steamship with overcrowded seasick passengers in third-class conditions. Now your fate was determined by a physical exam, 2 minutes with an inspector, and 29 questions. While approximately 1 in 5 were detained for the Board of Special Inquiry, only 2% of the 12 million immigrants processed at Ellis Island over 50 years were ever deported and sent back to their countries of origin. That's right, only 2%. The rest were welcomed with open arms into the melting pot that is the United States of America. Their foods, their holidays, their traditions all became American standards over the generation. Just try to imagine the United States without pizza or St. Patrick's Day. In fact, those poor immigrants became our grandparents and great-grandparents. I'll leave you now with the words of Emma Lazarus from her 1883 poem, etched into the base of the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shores. Send these, the tempest tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.